This podcast is sponsored by nobody. Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be welcoming the TV guidance counselor himself, Ken Reid. If you haven't listened to the TV guidance counselor podcast, do yourself a favor. Ken has talked to so many great celebrities, many that have been on this show, from Melanie Chardoff to Kathy Podwell to Karen Richmond, and to people I would love to have on here, Lorraine Newman, Fred Schneider, Ileana Douglas, so many people. What he does is he has them pick out a TV Guide issue beforehand and then has them talk about, the lineup of what they watched, whether it was shows they watched in their childhood or adulthood. And they talk about the historical context and stuff you can't get away with now and stuff. It is an amazing podcast. He's been doing it 9 years, and he's coming on the show today, and we're going to talk about that, classic TV. He was also in a punk band called 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, which we'll talk about too. He also did stand-up comedy in Boston. Also, too, happy birthday, Mick Jagger, the big 80. Can't believe him and Keith have made it this far. Keith will be 80 in December, and it is so friggin' amazing. The Rolling Stones. Happy birthday, Mick Jagger, the big 80. So yeah, here is my interview with Ken Reid. Hey Ken, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is such a great honor. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Absolutely, happy to do it.
Awesome. So, going back in time, I know that you started out playing in a punk band called 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, which, by the way, that sounds very punk rock. I like that name. It reminds me of the Dickies album, Took Us Over Disneyland.
Yeah, it's a film, but I got it from the band Perubu, the Cleveland band.
Oh yeah, it's a great movie. Spencer Tracy, Robert Mitchum, Van Johnson, great movie. Yeah. So were you playing guitar in the band?
I was, and I'm making air quotes that you can't see. I was singing. I played a little bit of guitar, so I'd write some songs, but I was singing in the band.
Nice. Mostly covers?
No, we were mostly originals. We did 2 albums, a couple of singles, went on a bunch of tours.
Nice. Like, who are the bands you toured with?
Well, we started with Dropkick Murphys here in Boston, so we played with them a lot. But we played with bands like the Suicide Machines and Rancid and Avail and I'm trying to think of any others that would be of note. AFI.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, who are the bands you guys were influenced by?
It was kind of all over the place. Everyone in Boston at the time kind of sounded, it was a scene they referred to as street punk, which was a very sort of oi UK 77 influence style of punk rock. We were more of like a West Coast early 80s hardcore type band. So bands like Agent Orange, The Descendants, and then DC bands like Bad Brains and bands like that.
Circle Jerks, Fear, Black Flag,
Yep.
People like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Were you guys into the Ramones?
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know how you can be a human being on Earth and not be into the Ramones.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a huge Ramones fan. I met Marky about 4 years ago at a horror convention. I'll never forget because his handler deleted a selfie I took with Jaretta. And I don't know if it was by accident or not, but I didn't even realize it until I got back to the hotel, and that was her only night there. I was like, damn it.
Ninja deletion.
Yeah. Oh, I was pretty pissed. Really pissed. I mean, she's been on the show twice, but still, I'd like a selfie with her, too.
Of course.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. So you guys gravitated mostly towards the West Coast punk, but like the British punk had to have been a big influence too.
Oh yeah, I mean the Damned are one of my all-time favorite bands, and are one of the first bands I ever got into.
Yeah.
The Clash. Obviously, we had the great honor of getting to meet Joe Strummer a number of times. He was living in Boston for a little bit of time, so that was really cool.
Oh, that is cool. Yeah. I like Billy Idol's band Generation X. They were pretty good.
Sure, yeah, Kiss Me Deadly's a great song. 100 Punks.
Yeah, Your Generation.
Yep.
Yeah.
We played with bands like Stiff Little Fingers, who were a Northern Irish band from that era, who were still doing shows around that time. Then there would be a lot of UK bands, like 80s UK bands, that would sort of reform in various capacities that would come through. One was called The Business. We played with them a number of times. There was a band called The Toy Dolls. There was a bunch.
Do you remember Subway Sect?
I do remember Subway Sect.
Yeah, I remember they bizarrely spun off into the Joe Boxers. They did that song, Just Got Lucky.
Yep.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that they're the same band, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that happened a lot, though. Like, the Skids became Big Country.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of those kind of, once people got a little more musically adept, they would change their name and become a different band. One of my favorite bands of all time is this band called The Sound that was fronted by a guy named Adrian Borland, who's sadly no longer with us, but they're easily the most underrated band of the 1980s, and they basically sound like the reputation Joy Division has.
Oh, yeah.
But prior to that, they were the first indie UK punk band to put out an album. They were called The Outsiders, and they did 2 really great albums. So it is interesting to see those bands kind of morph.
That is interesting. I gotta check them out. You attended Goldsmiths, University of London. While you were there, did you see like any of that old punk guard left over?
Not really. Although, like, I believe John Lydon met Sid Vicious there, and Blur met there. It was a weird time. Goldsmiths is in South London, in a place called New Cross, which right after I left became very hip, but when I was there was really rough. And right after I left, a lot of the bands from the early 2000s, I think they called the scene New Rave, bands like Block Party and bands like that came out of that scene. But that was like right after I left. But there was a place called the New Cross Inn, New Cross Inn or New Cross Tavern. I think it was the New Cross Inn, that was owned by 2 brothers, the Jones brothers, one of which was Terry Jones, or Terry Bones, who was in the business, but they started the band Discharge, and so I knew those guys from playing with the business. So the long answer to your short question is yes.
Yeah, I mean those pub punks were wild. You know, there's famous stories about American bands going to play in London the first time, and it turns into a Blues Brothers situation where they get things thrown at them. You know, like the English Beat took the Bangles to London for the first time. This guy threw a milk carton right in Susanna Hoff's face, and it gave her a little gash on her forehead.
Oh yeah, a lot of spitting.
A lot of spitting, yeah. I mean, they also found pre-chewed gum in her hair, and she had really short hair back then.
Wonderful.
It's crazy, yeah. Those British punks, they don't fuck around.
No, well, unless there's an amazing story where I don't know if you're familiar with the band Bad Brains, but they're fantastic band, and very large, tough black gentlemen from Washington D.C. who really don't take kindly to being treated inappropriately. And the first time they played in England, a skinhead used the N-word in the audience, and Daryl, the bass player, just put his bass down, went to the crowd, basically hospitalized the guy, got back on stage, and just kept playing.
Good for him. Oh, man. Yeah, those guys, man. God, it's something. So, did you become disillusioned with music and decided to just give comedy a try?
Not really. I mean, I never really set out to be, like, I am definitely not a musician. I never really set out to do that. I was just kind of the only loudmouth who would sing.
Yeah.
And I kind of always wanted to do comedy, and basically when everyone went to college, we kind of all spread to the 4 winds, so we more or less broke up, and I went to England, so I was like, oh, why not? I'll give comedy a try. I probably would have done this a couple of years ago had I not been in a band.
Yeah. What year was this?
This was 2000.
That's 2000. Yeah, in Boston?
I was actually in London, and then about the last 6 months I lived in London. Then I moved back to Boston and kept doing stand-up in Boston.
What was the British comedy scene like?
I had to be introduced as Canadian because they hated Americans, rightfully so at the time. John Oliver was hitting the same open mics I was. He ended up moving to the U.S. and he was pretty unknown in the U.K. until very recently. Stuart Lee, who's one of my favorite comics, had quit comedy for a number of years. He had written a musical called Jerry Springer the Musical, and he was just coming back to doing stand-up when I started, so I got to see him very frequently working on stuff, which was really, really great. But yeah, it was a lot of just kind of like surreally one-linery stuff, which isn't really my thing.
Yeah, that was my style when I did stand up. I was a one-liner guy. I tried to do long-form bits, and I had a couple that were good, but mostly people were just like, "Get to the joke, man," you know.
Yeah, I'm all about atmosphere. I'm not a pithy one-liner guy. I've written them from other people, but yeah, I never memorize stuff. I'm bad at writing stuff down. So if I had to word for word do things, it doesn't go well.
Yeah, I mean, I watched all the old variety shows when I was a kid, and I'd see the Borscht Belt comedians do the one-liners and stuff. That was kind of an influence of where that came from.
You wanted to play violin like Henny Youngman?
Oh no, I never wanted to be one of those guys who did the instrument thing, because for one, I have no musical talent, and two, by the time I started in 2006, it was a hacky thing to go up there with an instrument, you know.
Right.
So when you came back to Boston, I mean, were the old guys from the Ding Ho still around?
Yeah, and they're still around today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Boston's a very strange place in that it was a huge comedy city in the 80s and 90s. It had a number of big scenes. So the scene you're referring to, if you're listening to the Ding Ho scene, was sort of the first big one in the early 80s, and that was guys like Lenny Clark, Steve Sweeney. Stephen Wright was kind of the big breakout there, but you also have people like Kevin Meaney.
Bobcat.
Like that. Bobcat was sort of tail end, Paul Poundstone, Dana Gould.
Yep.
And then you had the second wave, which was built around Catch a Rising Star in Harvard Square, and that's where you get basically all the Mr. Show people, David Cross, Mark Maron,
Louis C.K.,
Lark Heitlinger, all those people came out of that sort of late 80s, early 90s scene, and then in the 90s, it pulled back a little bit, but that's when you get guys like Dane Cook and Bill Burr and those kind of guys. So by the time I had started, a lot of the Ding Ho guys were still around, but the sort of class of comedian that was just starting to move on and move to New York and LA and doing really well was like Eugene Merman and Jen Kirkman and Brendan Small, and those people.
Did you ever see Frankie Bastille?
I don't think I did.
Yeah, oh God, that guy was crazy. He was notorious for performing comedy shows where he was the headliner, and he asked not to have his name on the marquee because sometimes the IRS or his ex or the law would be after him.
That sounds about right. That sounds very Boston-y. Those are the same guys who would take their payment for a show in cocaine rather than in cash.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was one of those guys. Yeah, he died probably about 15, 20 years ago, something like that. And Mark Maron's got stories about him that he's brought up on WTF. Yeah, I started in 2006 in San Francisco, and I did a good 10 years, but I never got used to the cutthroat and shit talk backstage, I always felt it was unnecessary. There's a lot of open micers. Whether they're good or bad, they feel utterly at liberty to roast other comics, whether or not they're friends with them, and just say some mean, awful things, and I mean, I love the comedy, I love performing and what have you, but just the business side of it's just not good.
Yeah, it's a social life for a lot of people, and it's a lot of people who look at it as sort of a college freshman opportunity to reinvent themselves, and it can be very cliquey and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's never really been my scene either. But San Francisco San Francisco stand-up scene was more or less founded by the Boston comics who moved out there. So like Paula and Kevin Meaney moved out there, and that's why Bobcat, Tom Kenny, Dana Gould all moved out there. And they sort of became the foundation for that alt scene out there.
Absolutely, and also too, their improv is just fantastic too. A lot of guys I came up with, they started out in improv and went into stand up. I came up with Ali Wong, Chris
Oh yeah.
Garcia, Marcella Arqualo, Mo Mandel, people like that, and. Yeah, it was at that time when I started. Like Carlos Mencia was the biggest comedian in the world, and also Dane Cook, and everyone was like, "Oh God, why are these two guys, big?" And like comedy was in a weird place. And then 6 years later, the next boom explodes with podcasts.
Yeah, yeah. It's always in a constant state of evolution or de-evolution.
Right. So you've opened for greats like the late great Bob Saget, Todd Barry, and my favorite Patton Oswalt, who I think is the best comic of his generation. He's to me what Sam Kinison was to my dad, in that I can relate to everything that he's saying about pop culture and social criticism. He's like the class clown mocking everything.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it must have been great to open for all those guys.
Yeah, I mean that's always been, that was where I got really lucky when I moved back to Boston. I started doing shows with like Eugene Merman, and he would have me down on his shows in New York, and so I met a lot of people that I sort of had no business being on shows with, but whenever people would come through town, I would get recommended to open. So yeah, I got on some great shows. Yeah, Pat and I opened for a few times in like big theaters. That Saget thing, I did a bunch of outdoor like summer music venue sheds for a week, and that was amazing. I'm kind of shocked when I look back at all the people I've opened for.
Yeah, I saw Saget in 2017 at the San Jose Improv, and what a showman that guy is. 60 minutes of stand-up and 30 minutes of guitar playing and funny songs. And
Yeah.
I'm just sad that he didn't do a meet and greet at that particular show. I would have loved to have met him, It's just, I cried for a week when he died.
Oh, he was such a good dude, and we stayed in touch. And he was just an awesome guy, and truly loved doing stand up.
Oh, yeah.
Like he did not need to do stand up financially, but just liked doing it. And when I would do shows with him, he'd have notebooks and notebooks filled with jokes, most of which he'd never get to do because he'd be putting out fires on stage. But the guy just loved it.
Yeah. Oh God, it's a sad loss. It really is. So what age did you start collecting TV guides?
Oh, well, I suppose it depends on how you would define collecting,
Mm-hmm.
but I was an early reader, so around age 2 I was reading. My family had a subscription, so 2 or 3 years old I would kind of grab the TV guide as soon as it came in, read it cover to cover, and then kind of hang on to them.
Right. Yeah, because I'll tell you, I collected TV guides as a kid, and I regrettably say this. When we moved out of my childhood house, I threw all of them away, and I can't believe I did that.
Well, I will say as someone who's moved a couple times with massive collections of things, they can be a bit of an albatross pulling you down. And one of the great things about the world we live in today is that almost nothing is unattainable to re-get anymore.
Yeah.
And I've since COVID started, I think I've scanned 200 plus issues of TV Guide. So having those as PDFs, I look at them a lot more, and they're very cheap. Like if there's a specific TV Guide you want, like occasionally someone will pick an issue, and I don't feel like digging through my storage space.
Yeah.
So I'll just buy a copy of it on eBay for $2 and just scan that 2 days later. So it's attainable.
Right. I mean, I had, some TV guides with very memorable covers. Like I had the one where Saget is holding the video camera when America's Funniest Home Video started. I had the one where the cast of Friends are posing like they're doing a Calvin Klein ad. I mean, I had stuff like that, and I can imagine, like me, I mean, because I listen to your show quite often. You watch pretty much everything back then.
Oh yeah, growing up, absolutely. Yeah, I was up probably 22 hours a day, and the TV was on most of that time.
Yeah, yeah. Like in my house, we had 5 TVs, 4 for each bedroom and 1 for the living room. And starting at the age of 4, I can remember having a routine. I'd wake up 7:30 a.m., eat breakfast, put on Nickelodeon, watch Pinwheel, Today's Special. I had Bob Dermer, who did the voice of Sam, the store security, on here. Uh,
Nice.
Picture Page with Ray B. Cosby,
Yep.
Dennis the Menace, The Elephant Show with Sharon, Lois, and Bram. You remember them?
Of course.
Yeah,
Remember Rinky Dinky Doo?
yeah, I just reached out to Sharon's daughter to get her and Bram on here because Lois died 8 years ago, but they're still doing it. They're still performing for kids and stuff. Then at noon, I turned on TBS Superstation, watched Three Stooges shorts, The Munsters, Babs Family, assorted cartoons, you know. And then if it was a primetime night, we'd watch anything on NBC or ABC. CBS was mostly my grandmother's channel at that time. We didn't like a whole lot of stuff that was on CBS in 1987.
Right.
There wasn't a whole lot of good stuff. And, but if it was like an ordinary night, we'd watch Nick at Night. First, late afternoon, Nick at Night, you can't do that on television. Mr. Wizard's World, followed by Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp, The Monkees, Donna Reed, Patty Duke, Dobie Gillis, Laughing. I mean, I remember all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was, I always say on the show is we got exposed to, 50 years of entertainment history just because it was cheap, which was a good thing. Like there were shows, I never would have encountered Car 54 or Are You, which is one of my favorite shows of all time.
Oh, I forgot that.
Or many shows like that.
Mm-hmm. I forgot that Car 54, Where Are You was on that schedule too. Yes. Now, I've heard you talk about how, weird the Gary Marshall sitcoms got. And I got to tell you, I think that they should have ended in 1980, Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days, because, they're a great example of what happens when the creator stops giving a shit and goes off and starts making movies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, but, it's making money, so they'll keep plugging along. And, sadly, for a lot of the actors, they're kind of locked into being there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that I think that after Richie and Ralph left, the Happy Days should have been canceled. But there were some gems in those later seasons that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. Like, you remember the one with Phil Silvers?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, he's playing his real life daughter's father, and they have a real poignant moment at the end. It's kind of like Henry Fonda and Jane Fonda and On Golden Pond, kind of like a on camera resolution. I don't know how Phil Silvers was as a real life dad, but I can imagine he could be difficult like a lot of those old comedians. That's what that moment reminds me of.
Yeah, I mean, he was playing a lot of dads at that time. He was also Captain Stubing's dad on The Love Boat.
That's right, he was on the Love Boat. Yeah, so many of those old comedians were on the Love Boat. Milton Berle was on there, and I think I saw Norm Crosby in an episode once.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, which do you think is better, Love Boat or Fantasy Island?
Fantasy Island has that weird, creepy Mr. Rourke is the devil kind of undertone, so I go with Fantasy Island, and it's a lot less horny.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Oh my God, did you ever see that pilot that didn't make it, Bulba?
No.
Okay, it was kind of like a Love Boat and Fantasy Island type of scenario. It took place at like a hotel resort, and the owner was Jeff Altman, right after Pink Lady.
Oh, of course.
Jill Jacobson, who later did The New Gidget, was on it. I just had her on and we talked about this. And guess who was the head of security? 20-year-old Bill Hicks.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I wondered that had to be one of his only TV roles.
Yes, he was living in LA at the time. After he had his cocaine binge with Kinnison, he left and went to New York and stuff. But yeah, I saw this on YouTube, not even knowing it existed. It came up in an algorithm search, and I was like, "Holy shit, this is awesome!" Yeah, it's called Bulba.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, that is the amazing thing about the times we live in, as awful as they are. You can kind of see pretty much everything you never even knew about, let alone thought you'd see on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, I thank God for YouTube because I discovered so many unsold pilots that I otherwise wouldn't have known about. Like I saw Poor Devil with Sammy Davis Jr.
Oh yes, yeah.
Oh, I was cracking up when I saw that Christopher Lee was the devil,
Oh
and
yeah.
Jack Klugman is the guy who he has to convince to sell his soul, and Adam West is his boss, and he's fucking his wife.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean that show is absolutely bonkers, and that's when Sammy Davis Jr. was legitimately a part of the Church of Satan. He was a buddy of Anton LaVey and was like a Satanist.
I did not know that. Wow.
Oh yeah, card carrying.
I mean, everyone knows that he was Jewish. He converted to Judaism, right? So wow. So he had two religions. He was Jewish and he was satanic.
Indeed, indeed.
I did not know that. That is something new I'm hearing for the first time. Wow. That's kind of disturbing.
Yeah, it's a fun look up. I mean, LaVeyan Satanism. I mean, I am a devout atheist, but LaVeyan Satanism is kind of a gothy, silly, theatrical version. It's just humanism. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, hey, treat people okay and don't do anything bad.
Yeah, I mean, they're not really talking about killing anybody or anything.
No.
It's not like a hate group or anything.
No.
Oh my God, Andy Kaufman did a pilot where he was a robot. It was called Stick Around.
That I've seen. That I know.
Oh yeah, that was crazy. I interviewed the guy Craig Richard Nelson who was in that.
Yeah, I mean, one of two times Andy Kaufman played a robot. Both times pretty terrible.
Yeah, heart beeps.
Oof.
Yeah. Rick Springfield, he did that pilot Nick Knight.
Yes, which became a series, but without him.
Really, what was the series?
It was called Forever Night, and it was part of CBS did a summer schedule, and I think '89 that was supposed to be like for network TV, kind of erotic, like erotic thriller type stuff, and the whole campaign was "It's too hot to sleep," and so Silk Stockings was one of the shows, Forever Night was one of the shows. There was one other show. None of them lasted long, but then Silk Stockings got picked up by USA Network, who made new episodes, and then Nick Knight moved to Canada, became Forever Night, and went into first-run syndication.
Oh man, that's crazy. Yeah, I thought that was a hilarious premise to have Rick Springfield play a vampire.
I was into it. I thought it wasn't that bad of an idea. He was like, he's a detective, so he's out at night. Makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, the guy's name was Geraint Wine Davies, and he was Canadian.
Oh, that makes sense.
Who played Forever Night? Yeah, it was a Canadian show too. Interesting. Yeah. I found out that Sam Jones, who played Flash Gordon, he played the Spirit in a pilot.
Yes, which actually isn't that bad. It was a failed pilot that they aired as a made-for-TV movie, and it was one of the better. For the time, one of the better comic book things. Human Target was done at that time. It was like, They also did, was it Scout? Was Mark, I'm trying to think of the character. But there was another indie comic they did a made-for-TV movie for as well that wasn't great. But The Spirit was actually pretty fun. I don't know if I would have cast Sam Jones, but it was pretty fun.
Yeah, I met him at a Comic-Con. He hit on my mom in front of his wife.
Yeah, that sounds like him.
Yeah, I mean, he was classy about it. He wasn't a scumbag or anything, but he was a nice guy. Really nice.
Yeah.
And let's see, Reb Brown played Captain America.
Yes, indeed he did in that 78 TV movie around the time we got the super porny feeling Doctor Strange movie.
And the Amazing Spider-Man, I've talked to Nicholas Hammond and Ellen Brie, who was on the show.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they were both cool. They both enjoyed their cult success of that show. They do the Comic-Con circuit. What's that one pilot? Oh my God, Adam West is like an aging actor who becomes a crime fighter.
Yep, it's Look Well. It was Conan O'Brien and Robert Smigel.
Right. I saw that. I was cracking up. He said, "Hey, didn't you play Wyatt Earp in the 50s?" "No, that was Hugh O'Brien."
He's pretending to be a homeless guy, and he goes, "I have at a home. The sidewalk's my pillow."
Yeah. Did you know that after the A-Team, Mr. T had a show called TNT?
I did, with Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah. Oh my God. I didn't even know that show existed. It was on the Family Channel.
Yeah, that was also a Canadian show, and
Right.
it picked up by the Family Channel in the U.S., who picked up a lot of Canadian shows. Maniac Mansion was a Canadian show. There was a few other, I think The New Lassie was Canadian.
Even though it wasn't Canadian, but the star was. I talked to Duncan Rigueur. He played Zorro.
Oh, yeah.
That was on the Family Channel. Yeah, he told me that was a fun experience because they were shooting up in Spain. Several months out of the year.
Oh, yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, you like the Misfits of Science, right?
I love the Misfits of Science.
Okay, here's a funny anecdote. Last year, I interviewed Diane Savita, who played the secretary.
Mm-hmm.
She was Robert Englund's wife on V. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Her husband created those shows. He was a producer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she did this movie. It's kind of a cult indie film called El Norte. It was a staple on PBS back in the day, and I asked her, how she got the part. And throughout the episode, we had a couple of technical difficulties. So after I asked her how she got the part, 30 seconds of dead silence happened, and then her voice comes back halfway through the story. I interrupted her twice, which you can hear in the episode. I'm trying to get her to go back, but she can't hear me because the technical difficulty.
Editing and technology is your best friend.
Right. So I took about 27 seconds out of that 30 seconds so people can get an idea of what happened. And I thank God that she didn't want to listen to it afterwards because that would have been embarrassing.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Oh my God. When you were growing up in Boston, were there any local horror hosts there?
We sort of did. We had a thing called FEEP in the 60s, which was supposed to be an alien, but it basically looked like a light bulb that hosted things. We had Creature Double Feature here, which didn't have an on-camera host. It was just a voiceover guy, but it was Dale Dorman, who was a local radio guy. That was kind of it. We didn't really have any on-camera guys. We had some kids shows, like Major Mud was a kid show, and there was another one with a space guy, I can't think of his name, but they were more the local hosts. And we had our own Bozo. There was a Boston Bozo forever.
Yeah, and then in the 2000s, Penny Dreadful came, and I've had her on the show a couple times.
Yep, yeah, she's down in southern Mass, I think, on the Rhode Island border.
Right. Yeah, by the time I was born, John Stanley was wrapping up on Creature Features in the Bay Area because he'd replaced Bob Wilkins, who was big in the 70s when my parents were growing up. And I've had John on here twice. He's a great guy. But we didn't have any local guys when I was growing up. So I grew up on Captain USA, USA Up All Night.
Commander USA's Groovy Movies.
Yep, Joe Bob Briggs on TNT Monster Vision. I didn't see drive-in theater because my mom worked for the cable company and she knew how expensive the Family Channel was, or the movie channel was, and so we never got it. And Offbeat Cinema, which is still going. I've had Rhonda Shear on, and I've had the female co-host of Offbeat Cinema on here, and I did an email interview with Joe Bob Briggs when I first started. I'm hoping to get him on here to do a verbal and stuff. Yeah.
Totally. There was also a really good show on Comedy Central called Drive-In Reviews with this guy Buzz Killimoff. That was only on for one season. That was really great.
Yeah. I also talked to Vampira's niece, and she told me something that I was not surprised by. When her aunt was doing her show at ABC Studios in Hollywood, Johnny Carson was doing a show there at ABC, and he made a pass at Vampira, and she rejected him. And then 25 years later, she begged his people to let her on the Tonight Show, but Johnny was the king of grudge holders, so he never did it.
Of course. She's another Massachusetts person, grew up in Gloucester, I believe.
That's right, she was, yeah. Yeah, her niece lives up in Oregon or something, and she's just like her aunt in many ways, I'll tell you. Of course, the horror anthology shows were great. I loved The Hitchhiker. I would watch that when my parents were asleep. Did you watch that?
Of course, yeah. That's another Canadian show that was canceled and reinvigorated, I guess I'd say, when USA Network decided to co-produce the series, so it came back.
Oh yeah, my friend Marie Lauren, she was on one of the last episodes that was over at USA Network. Yeah, the show was not the same again once it moved over to USA because there was no bad language or nudity, you know?
Right. I mean, that was a lot of the shows USA Network picked up.
Yeah, and Riff Markowitz, who produced and created, his brother Mitch, of course, was on the hilarious House of Dr. Frightenstein, and I've had him on here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Also, Tales from the Crypt, of course. I mean, that was just fantastic. You know, movie stars like Tom Hanks and Arnold Schwarzenegger would direct episodes, which I always thought was kind of crazy.
Oh yeah, but I mean that was Zemeckis, and yeah, it was a good. Those anthology shows were a good way to get to take a minimal risk if those guys wanted to learn how to direct. You weren't shelling out for a whole movie.
Right, they wanted to get their Directors Guild card. Yeah, I didn't even know the reboots of The Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents existed until the Sci-Fi Channel.
Oh, the 80s versions?
Yeah.
I loved them when they were on. They were great. I mean, USA Network, the two other anthology shows that USA Network picked up after they were canceled was Alfred Hitchcock Presents and the Ray Bradbury Theater, which originally was on Showtime. But all of those are really great.
Oh yeah, Tales from the Dark Side.
Monsters, sure.
Yeah, Monsters. Oh God, there was an episode. My friend Sharon Sharth played a woman who had like a disfigured face. It was an episode that Tom Noonan wrote and directed.
Oh yes, Noonan wrote and directed the final episode of Monsters, which was based on a Stephen King short story called The Moving Finger, and I believe the only one in it, and it's really good.
I gotta check that out. Yeah, I had a friend who had Noonan on his podcast. He was such a dick.
Yeah,
he's crazy. Amazing stories. I loved. I think even in its 2-season glory, I think it said just about everything it needed to say.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, the episode where the high school kid is magnetic. That one was just pretty trippy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I interviewed the magnetic nerd girl, Lisa Jane Persky, and when I told her that she terrified me at the end of that episode, she like spit out her water and started laughing.
Yeah, no one ever thinks they're scary to people, and people who think they are scary to people generally aren't.
Yeah, they put it out there, and they don't know how people are going to react.
Right.
Did you love the Stephen J. Cannell shows?
I liked them, but I wasn't crazy about them.
Yeah.
I was sort of watching, Canon Pictures action films, so it seemed a little bit watered down for me, but, you couldn't not like them.
That's an interesting comparison. You know what's funny? I consider Canon Films and Glenn Larson to be one of the same, because whatever mainstream movie hit at the box office, they would rip them off.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was like a copy of a copy, it's the Asylum Pictures of the 80s.
Yeah, Glenn Larson was in that singing group, the Four Preps, and I interviewed Bruce Belland, who was his best friend, since high school and stuff, and even he'll admit that Glenn Larson wasn't totally original as a producer.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, he got more or less sued for ripping things off from the Rockford Files. He would actually go take notes on the set sometimes.
James Gardner punched him in the parking lot.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember Gardner was interviewed for the Archive of American Television, and he's like, there was a producer, I forget his name, I hate him so much I forget his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh my God. Well, what I liked about Cannell shows is that the writing was always clever and sharp, and he showed characters that had flaws that were also strengths,
Totally, yeah, the defective detective.
Exactly. I mean, he had a detective that, rarely, if ever, used a gun.
Right.
Whether it was Beretta or Rockford. And, I was a huge Greatest American Hero fan because William Catt looked exactly like my dad. And I met him at a convention and I showed him a picture and he was like, wow, I could be your uncle. Yeah, and also I was a huge Renegade fan. Kathleen Kinmon is a huge friend of mine.
Oh yeah, Renegade was, who didn't love Lorenzo Lamas post was Dance Fever? I think he took over after he had a dance show that was really kind of incredible.
Exactly. What's your favorite era of Saturday Night Live?
My favorite era is, I actually really like the 1985-86 season, the first season Lorne Michaels came back, which people tend to hate, but it's more Terry Sweeney and Robert Downey Jr. and Anthony Michael Hall. There's some great stuff there, and that was the first season that I watched live, so it has kind of a special place for me. But really that like 85 to 90 is kind of untouchable.
That there's some gems in that season. I remember, when Ron Reagan Jr. hosted, and they did the Back to the Future parody with the Hellcats in the Navy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Terry Sweeney playing Nancy Reagan.
That was brilliant, yeah. Or Pee Wee Herman hosted that season, and him and Randy Quaid are doing that guy talk in the locker room.
Oh yeah, Libby's or a highly waxed bumper.
Yeah.
Man.
I heard Dan Vitale tell Mark Maron him and Pee Wee like almost got into a fight at the after party.
That doesn't surprise me. Yeah, I mean Pee Wee's kind of responsible for oh my God, why am I blanking? Captain Carl from Pee Wee's thing.
Phil Hartman.
Yeah, Phil Hartman being on the show because he brought Phil with him to write that episode.
Oh, I did not know that. That makes sense. That makes sense. Wow. Yeah. My favorite era. I mean, I love most eras, but like the original, that holds a special place in my heart because I saw that first when I was like 5 or 6. It was on Nick at Night in reruns at first.
It cut it up into the half-hour best ofs, yeah.
Right, and then later I saw it again on Comedy Central. It was just those guys. They don't make them like those guys anymore. They were just so good. I mean, not every show was great, not every sketch was great, but you liked what they were doing because they were doing something that had never been done before.
Yeah, they didn't grow up watching the show, so they weren't doing sort of their version of what they think the show is, which is kind of the most interesting time for a show like that. I'm also a diehard SCTV guy, so. Me
too. Oh, that show was so genius. Oh my God, SCTV with Benny Hill Street Blues and Rick Moranis playing Woody Allen.
Oh yeah, well, Rick Moranis playing George Carlin is great. Or his Don Rickles is really good.
His Dick Cavett too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, like you, I had Ann Beats on before she passed. I've also had Tom Schiller on. I regret having Gary Weiss on. He's an old grumpy curmudgeon. It disappointed me.
He was probably a young curmudgeon too, I suspect.
Yeah, a couple of people have told me that. The only cast member that I've had on is Robin Duke. I just had her on recently.
Oh, she's great. I'd love to talk to her. She's really an interesting person and was also a cast member of SCTV.
Yes, we talked about all of that stuff in all the movies. Our mutual friend Ian from English tried to get me Mary Gross, but she was very resonant about doing another podcast. So, that's unfortunate. Even Robin, I think, tried to get her for me. I want to get James Signorelli, because he directed Easy Money and Elvira, Mistress of the Dark.
Right, which is a great movie.
Oh yeah, fantastic. Hopefully I'll get him at some point and stuff. I've heard you say, about how, it was so weird how so many shows had characters who were adopted back in the 80s. I think that was a commentary on the black market adoptions that were starting to come into the public consciousness on like 60 Minutes and stuff. I think that there was like a room full of writers, they're watching 60 Minutes on a Sunday night and they're like, hey, there's adoption again. Let's talk about it on a sitcom,
For sure. I also think they kind of did some interesting things in order to make shows about, say they wanted to make a show about an interracial couple. They're not going to make that show, pardon my dogs, but they can make a show about a white guy adopting black kids.
I know, it's weird. But yeah, I mean, it still goes on to this day. The black market adoptions is very disturbing, but I don't think I don't think it's as shocking as it was considered back then, because everyone was watching the same shows back then, so everyone knew about it that way, and now it's just splintered because it's on the internet.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, of course. But then, you also get, like, Kate and Allie is basically a show about a lesbian couple, but it's not. My two dads. So I think they got a little creative with some unrealistic scenarios in order to tell slightly different stories than the norm.
Right. Did you see any public access shows growing up that you were like, this is so brilliant, how come it's not on a national show?
I saw a lot of public access shows, and I had one when I was 12, but none that I would say were brilliant.
Is it out there on YouTube?
My show isn't, no, thank God. The only thing that is out there is there was a local sketch comedy show on the same channel that did a parody of my show, and that's on YouTube.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we had one in the Bay Area called Fantasy Bedtime Hour. It was where two naked girls are in bed analyzing a book. I can't remember what the book was, but it was pretty popular back in the day. Now it's kind of obscure. And what they would do is they would read like a chapter in each episode, figure out what it's about, and then cut to them doing a sci-fi or horror movie scene parody. And it was really bizarre, and it would go on for a few minutes, and then it would go back to them in bed, but sometimes a guy would be with them, and the guy would be trying too hard to get with them.
Yeah, that's way more risque than we had. I mean, we basically had old people reading the newspaper and complaining. That was the majority of our cable access.
Yeah, I interviewed those two girls, and they told me, I think Showtime was interested in buying the show, but they couldn't afford a lawyer that would make sure they wouldn't get ripped off, so they said, no, let's just do this as a hobby.
And they're probably better off in the long run, given the way things have worked out for most people.
Yeah, I mean, they did like 40 episodes of the show in like 5 years or something, and I think it ran the gamut after a while, too. So you've been doing TV Guidance Counselor 9 years. So what made you want to start it in the first place? Was it because the podcasting was starting to get popular?
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of wanted to do a podcast, but just didn't have an idea that I thought was good. I didn't want to do like here's comics, talk about comedy, just because there were so many, especially at that time. So yeah, I had all these TV guides, and my friend Sean Sullivan is a very funny comic. Mm-hmm. Basically said, just do a podcast of what people do when they come over your house, which is, they'll gravitate towards the TV guides and pick one up and go through and go, oh, hey, look at this show, remember this? So that's exactly what it was, and it kind of still is almost 10 years in.
Yeah, I mean, I discovered you during the pandemic in 2020. I was doing research on Anne to interview her, and I found the episode you two did, and I listened to it, and I was like, oh my God, this is so original and so awesome. Like, I didn't know this show existed, and I became a fan right away. And, I tell people all the time, listen to your show and stuff. I think it's great.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's I don't know what's going on with my dogs. I apologize.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's always weird to me to learn, and interesting to me to learn how people hear about the show, because I'm always just kind of amazed anyone listens. And so that's very interesting. Yeah, Anne was great. Somehow I've only had 2 guests pass away, which is kind of amazing considering the era of TV I talk about. But I'm so glad that I got to talk to her, and we got that, that episode kind of, I don't want to say on tape forever, because that's not a thing, but, is there for posterity.
Sadly, Anne was 6 or 7 minutes late for our interview, and then she had to go early, and we never got to finish it. As soon as we got to Square Pegs, after talking about National Lampoon Saturday Night Live for a long time, she had to go, sadly. We were going to do a part 2, but it never came to happen. But I cherish it because we did have a good talk. And yeah, I mean, for people who don't listen to the show, so what you do is you have the guest pick out an issue from their childhood or maybe their adulthood, and you guys just go through the shows and talk about the historical context of what's accepted then and not accepted now, and just talk about what made them great. That's pretty much the premise, right?
Yeah, we all kind of were pre-millennium TV. We all sort of watch the same thing. So,
Yeah.
everyone has that shared experience. So it's a really good in to talk about our shared experiences. But at the same time, TV is so intimate and unique in that it exists in all of our homes and our environments. So it's kind of intrinsically linked to stories about growing up and our specific family. So that's always different. And, the people that I talk to tend to be people whose work I love, so we end up usually almost liking the same things. So it ends up being, a really interesting in to chat and a way to get to know somebody who you kind of feel like you've always known, and have made many new friends by doing it that way on the show.
Yeah, and then you also do episodes where it's just a straight up, interview like this. But is that because the guest isn't a big fan of TV? They just acted on TV.
Not always. Sometimes people get confused by the premise, or it feels like work.
Yeah.
The TV guy and rest of it, which I totally get. But some people only do the show because the premise seems really fun to them. So there's people who I've had on who really don't do a lot of interviews, or who don't do podcasts, but they really like the idea of that premise. So, it works both ways. People, it's always easy to talk about yourself. So sometimes we do that. I always give people the option because, there are always people too who say, oh, I didn't watch that much TV. And then once they start flipping through a TV guide, they go, oh, yes, I did. And there's a ton they watch. But, I don't like to rule anything out. I'd rather just talk to the person,
Right. And, well, you do it so well too because you're just, you're just so casual. You're a natural at it. Who have been your favorite guests so far?
Oh, that's tough. So I've had over 600. That's only, I think, a third of what you've had. But Bonnie Hunt was massive for me. I'm such a huge fan of her.
That was a good one. Yeah.
So amazing. Cassandra Peterson, who's on fire, was really great. Dave Thomas of SCTV was a really great one for me. Ted Danson was a good one. Jane Seymour was really fun. I'm trying to think of some of the others that, those ones come to mind immediately that I really, really love doing.
Yeah, those are all good ones. I've been lucky with a lot of the TV legends I've talked to. Some of my favorites have been like Sharon Gless and Melanie Chardoff and Christine Hodge, who played Simone on Head of the Class.
Oh, yeah, Melanie's great.
Charlene Tilton. Did you have her on?
I've never had Charlene on. She'd be great.
Yeah. Oh, I gotta tell you, she did this raunchy sex comedy movie called Sweater Girls, and
I know.
I believe in my heart of hearts she was looking at her IMDb when we were talking because the credit that she did before Sweater Girls, it was a horror movie for TV she did with Peter Cushing. Can't remember the name of it offhand, but as soon as she was done telling the story about it, I think she was looking at her IMDb, and then she jumped ahead and said, and then I did Dallas, and I was on there for several years, and I had a good run, with Emmys and stuff, and now I got this coming out on Hallmark, and I have my bio coming out, and it's been a good journey. And then I asked her, what was it like hosting Saturday Night Live? And then we talk another 20 minutes, because she was trying to end the interview, I think, because of Sweater Girls.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. People do these gigs in, a couple days or a week 40 years ago. And, it can be, people were like, I had to make a car payment, and I'm thinking you can be embarrassed, especially of her era.
Full disclosure, I have one of the guys from Sweater Girls coming on next week.
Oh, nice. Hopefully he won't feel the same way.
Oh, no. Megan King, he is a Hollywood born and bred. He went to his father, Wright King, was a character actor back in the day, and he grew up with all the Hollywood kids, and so he and I talked on the phone the other day, and so it's going to be a good chat, I think.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite interview overall that I've done is Gina Shock of the Go-Go's.
Yeah, I bet. I've talked to Gina briefly, but I haven't had her on the show. But yeah, she's got a million stories. Kathy Valentine with the Go-Go's was really fun as well.
Kathy and I have been going back and forth for a while. I hope it happens with me and her because her and Gina have always been my two favorite because they are the most down to earth and the nicest of the Go-Go's. And when they did interviews, they were just so awesome, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've met everyone but Charlotte, and they've all been just sweethearts. Like Jane is awesome. They're all really really nice.
Jane in her strange kooky way. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
She had a pop punk band in the '90s called Frosted, and the S and T were capitalized because she's a huge Star Trek fan. So they played in like Star Trek uniforms, but they were this amazing pop punk band, and they only put out one record. But I saw them live, and I loved that record. So I think I endeared myself to her by enjoying that record.
Yeah, that she was also in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home.
Yep, for that very reason.
Yeah, my favorites that you've done, like I love all the ones you've done with mutual friends, like Melanie Chardoff and Karen Richmond and Kathy Podwell and Kathy Stewart. You had Lucia Fasano on, which I thought was interesting because I had her mother, Cynthia Cyril, on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I know Lucia from stand-up, but I was a huge fan of her dad's movies. So we met when I did the Bridgestone Comedy Festival in Portland, Oregon. I was doing a live one with Brendan Small, and Lucia was living there. That was really fun.
Yeah, I asked her to come on a couple weeks ago. She's got summer school that she's teaching right now, but she will come on at a certain point, she said.
She's great. Yeah, you'll have a great time.
Yeah, I also love that Janine Garofalo one you did. That was very deep and very haunting when she was talking about how fucked up the business could be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Janine's been put through the ringer in the business and is a really sweet and smart person. And it's terrible. I've been lucky enough to do a bunch of shows with Janine. I've got to open for her a bunch, too, which is really cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, the Fred Schneider one was great because...
Oh, yeah.
I love hearing Fred Schneider geek out in a way that only Fred Schneider could.
The Gorn.
Yeah, the Gorn. I've interviewed one of the Gorns.
Oh, nice.
There's two guys that take credit for playing the Gorn because that's the nature of wearing a mask on screen. It happens with the Halloween guys and the Leatherface guys and Jason's. Yeah, Bobby Clark. Him and Gary Combs, they were both the Gorn, and I've talked to Bobby Clark.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
I liked what they did with the Gorn in Brave New Worlds. They kind of reinvented the Gorn as like a less silly race of aliens and truly terrifying. It was a really interesting take on it.
Right. And you've had people on I'm jealous of, like Ileana Douglas and Senta Moses and Heather Parkhurst. She was interested for like a moment, but now all she does is like my stuff on Instagram and doesn't get back to me.
Yeah, she's got a lot going on too. But yeah, I mean, they're all real sweethearts. Like and Ileana Douglas is just awesome. She's so smart. Her book is fantastic.
Yeah, I want to talk to her about classic movies because we would both have a lot of fun with that, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully when her next book comes out, I'll get the chance. Have you had anyone decline that really, really disappointed you?
I'm never disappointed when people decline because I'm kind of amazed that anyone ever says yes anyway. Mm-hmm. They're basically doing me a free favor, so I'm like, why would you talk to me at all? Paul Rubens doesn't really do many interviews. I've talked to him about it. He's like sort of uncomfortable not doing things in character, which I totally get. I've talked to John Waters a number of times about doing it, but he is mega busy.
Yeah.
So that will never happen, but he's one of my all-time white whales. Again, very nice about it. My two favorite no's are Albert Brooks.
Yep.
His manager wrote me back, and the email said, this won't happen.
Yeah.
Which was one of my favorites. And then Joan Collins wrote back saying, this sounds like publicity for publicity's sake, and Dame Collins does not do such things.
Oh, my God.
That was a fun one.
Oh, my God. I have to admire you for having balls to even reach out to any of these people, especially Joan Collins, because I've heard a lot of horrendous things about Joan Collins.
I mean, all they can say is no, or just not reply. So, you ask them once and... You never know.
Albert Brooks has been turning down Marin for years, and I really hope that eventually he relents and goes on his show, because I really think they would have a really good talk about the history of comedy, you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Albert Brooks is weirdly very private.
Yeah, that's kind of bizarre, too. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, I've done, over 1,849 interviews, and I've had many people decline. And I'll tell you, the one that makes me laugh the most, I've had a lot of actors declined who are Scientologists, because they hear sci-fi at the beginning of the show, and they probably think that I want to have them on to, like, play gotcha with them. And I would never do that, And I find that kind of insulting that they would even think that, But I will tell you, in the last year or so, some of them have actually relented and came on after hearing good things about me, like Sandra Curry, who's been on your show.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, she's awesome. Yeah, and Gloria Gifford, she's actually run into a scandal with a former acting student of hers who's like absolutely crazy. He actually contacted me after I interviewed her, and I had to block him, unfortunately. Yeah, but Brenda Vaccaro blocked me recently.
Oh, really? For asking her?
Yeah, and it's funny. She was Gilbert Gottfried's last guest on his show the day that he died. Like, they did the interview for like 2 hours, and then he went home, and he was just, oh my God, he was not feeling it, and then he was gone, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's changed in the last 10 years too is that there are so many more podcasts, and there are people that I've asked who'd never been asked to do a podcast, and
oh yeah,
almost everybody now has 10 asks all the time. So I kind of get it. But the best way to book is just people having it recommended by people they know. If they're like, I did this and had a good time, that I always have the best luck.
I've gotten so many of those in the last few years since the pandemic, and I'm just so lucky and so grateful. I love it, and I've talked to a lot of people who had never been on a podcast before, and I love it when they tell you, I don't do interviews, but I'm glad I did this one, and they kind of make it sound like it's the only one they're ever going to do, and then you see them on others, and I'm like, yes, I can't believe I was the first one.
Oh yeah, once they rip the Band-Aid off and realize, especially actors from a certain generation, they are really not used to doing long-form stuff or talking about themselves. It didn't exist, unless you were on Dick Cavett or something. So
right.
I could kind of get why it would be not even uncomfortable, but just unknown for them. So I think once they do it and get out of the way, yeah, they're going to do it all the time if they had fun.
Has anyone ever said to you, they want to be paid for an interview?
3 times.
Yeah, that's about it. That's about it for me. The one that still sticks in my craw is Tammy Aaron, who played Pippi Longstocking in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
We scheduled to do this interview. I remember it was November of 2018, and the day of, she had to reschedule. And so I waited a month for the rescheduling, and then when she finally got back to me, she said, I'll give you 20 minutes for $400. And I'm like, you are out of your fucking mind. And so she blocked me, and then I did something that I never did before and I never did since. I called her out on her Facebook fan page and got blocked on there too. I was pretty upset about that, because she committed to an hour and we were going to do it, and then she reschedules on me and then comes back to me with that a month later,
Yeah, I mean, I never try to fault people. I never know what they're going through, especially people who are, former actors or current actors. It's tough road. So, I'll always just decline and say, I'm sorry, I don't really pay anyone, but, I appreciate that. A lot of these people, especially with all the autograph conventions,
oh, yeah,
they look at sort of any time they spend with a fan, which, a lot of them look at doing a podcast as, which I get, as like getting an autograph. So, they charge what they charge for an hour of autographs.
I mean, you've interviewed some enemies of mine in the horror community, and I don't want to name names because I don't want to
Tell me
be.
that off mic, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be negative or anything, right? And yeah, I mean, those particular ones, they're particularly like that, and it's really a shame. And these are the horror people. I think that they're the worst. I mean, I've heard some things about the Comic-Con people, but I've gone to Comic-Cons and I've had nothing but great experiences with those people and getting them on the show and stuff.
Well, I mean, I think with the horror cons, they've been going, the horror con, like, autograph scene, been going on much longer than the sort of pop culture Comic-Con autograph scene, even though you have stuff like San Diego Comic-Con's been around forever, but they never really had, the celebrity thing is a relatively new phenomenon. But horror conventions have been doing that since the 80s, and a lot of those people have been doing those cons since the 80s. So, I think they're a little cynical and could be a little calloused over, for sure, in that world. Many of them also are managed by the same person for a lot of those things, who's not a great guy.
Yep.
So, that's sort of, it's a very small world, that scene.
Yes, it is. Now, you don't have to name names, but have you ever had a guest that was so awful you didn't release the episode?
Never. I've never not released an episode. The closest I got was when I was interviewing The Damned. Captain Sensible walked out on me after 10 minutes. But then I was able to interview Dave Vanian, the singer of The Damned, who never does interviews. And we talked for like an hour. It was like one of the longest interviews he ever did, and it ended up being fantastic. But no, I've never not released an episode. I've only lost 3 episodes ever. 2 of them were live, and one was a studio one, and I had the SD card on my recorder died. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, but like I only interview people I'm a fan of. I can't interview someone that I don't respect. And I've tried it a few times, and it didn't work well in my favor because the person was just god awful. And I did release it anyways, just to make the person happy.
Yeah, I mean, if I don't know somebody's work or have affinity for what they do, it's difficult to interview them. I've done work for hire where I've done Q&As for conventions and stuff, and a lot of those, like, for example, I'm not a Star Trek fan at all, but I've interviewed a lot of Star Trek people, and I've had to really cram to be able to interview them, which I don't mind doing, but in those cases, those are people I probably wouldn't have talked to otherwise.
I've only interviewed the guest stars of all the Star Trek programs. I've never actually interviewed main cast members. So I'm
trying to think of who I've talked to. There's been a bunch.
Did you have Walter Koenig on?
No, I've had original Star Trek cast members. It's people who are on, like, Voyager.
Because I'm thinking of another podcast host then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody I know had Walter Koenig on. So who have you wanted and then they passed away?
Oh, there's a lot. Ron Glass.
Yeah.
I've been emailing with, and he passed away. Tawny Katane.
Oh.
Marky Post. Bob Saget was always going to do it every time he came to town, and we just never had time. Who else? Those are the big ones, I think. Oh, John Paragon.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to get John, and I'm friends with all the groundlings from that time, and they said, John's kind of quirky. I don't know if you can handle him.
Yeah. I talked to him a few times, but yeah, that was Louis Anderson.
Oh, yeah. I had Tawny Katane on, and that was not a happy story.
She had a rough go.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. But like Joel Reid, who directed Bloodsucking Freaks.
Yeah.
He was scheduled to come on like in February of 2020. He was getting out of the hospital that day. He had COVID and didn't know what it was yet, right? Well, the day of, he told me on Facebook that he's got to remain in the hospital, and then a month later he died of COVID.
Yeah, I don't. Stephen First is another one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mark Blum, who played Rosetta Arquette's husband in Desperately Seeking Susan, was scheduled to come on. He died of COVID. Yep. The biggest heartbreaker for me was Cindy Williams. Yeah,
for sure.
I tried.
Olivia Newton-John's another one.
Oh yeah, a friend of mine was getting him on his was getting her on his podcast too. And by the way, she died never even doing a podcast. But she was ready to do them, and it happened. It was sad. So who's on your bucket list as far as TV legends go?
TV legends is... I don't know if there's any TV legends left. But there are, like, I love John Waters, David Lynch, Guillermo del Toro, Stephen King, George Clooney.
Mm-hmm.
It's a TV legend, was in so many things that didn't go. That's probably my bucket list right there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've been going back and forth with Valerie Landsberg from Fame for a year.
Oh, nice.
She was my number one crush growing up. I hope she gets to do it. And then Darby Hinton, who played the boy on Daniel Boone. Okay, I don't necessarily want to talk about Daniel Boone. I never watched that show, but I love the exploitation movies he made with Graydon Clark, so I wanted to get him on because of those. Yeah.
Yeah, Julia Duffy was in Wacko, I think, the Graydon Clark movie.
Yes.
I think that's the only person I know that worked with Graydon Clark.
Oh, yeah, and I've had Graydon on. But, yeah, I mean, I have, friends to suggest for you. Do you know Stacey Lane Wilson?
I don't.
Aside from the fact that she's the daughter of Don Wilson of the Ventures.
Okay, yep.
She is
I've been hearing that documentary about the Ventures.
Right. She's a rock journalist and historian, and she's an indie horror filmmaker, and I think you and her would have a great talk.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'd love to have her on.
She's currently trying to get me Holly Knight, who you just had.
Oh, yeah. Holly's great.
Steve Cox, do you know him?
I don't.
He's written several books about classic TV shows, about the Munsters, the Addams Family, Johnny Carson, lots of old TV, and I think you and him would have a good talk.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that'd be great.
Shelley Herman, she was a page at NBC, and she just wrote a book about it called My Peacock Tale.
Shelley has recorded an episode that will be out in the next month.
Oh, my God. And guess what? I suggested you to her publicist, Lori.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I sent her a bunch of suggestions, and Shelley has done all of them so far, except for Mark Maron, because he's a hard get. But, I'm so happy. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
Do you know Mark Malkoff?
I don't think so.
He did the Johnny Carson podcast for like a decade.
Okay.
Yeah, you and him would have a good talk, and he knows a lot about late night TV and stuff.
Oh, nice.
Pleasant Gaiman.
Oh, yeah, I do know Pleasant. I've talked to her about doing the show before.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. She will lead you down rabbit holes you never expected. She's so funny.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
Do you remember the show Whole High?
Yes.
Yeah, you remember the bitchy girl, Holly Fields, on there?
Oh, yeah, I've talked to Holly. She was in Wishmaster.
Yes. I love Holly. I always recommend her. She's got great stories. She dated Corey Haim and stuff. And speaking of Corey Haim, why did you stop using the Lost Boys sample at the beginning of your show?
Oh, I just refreshed it. I was like, it's been 8 years, and I got the new theme song that Josh Cater of Smoking Post did, so I thought I'd change it up. And also it was fun because it was the new clip is from Barney Miller, which I talk about on the show a lot, and it's Stuart Lincoln, who's been on the show.
Yeah, Carrie Haim, Corey's sister, is a friend of mine, and I don't know if she knew about that, but I'm sure she'd be pretty happy. She loves it when people celebrate her brother,
Oh yeah, as well she should.
Did you have to ask permission to do your version of the TV Guide logo?
I did not. I believe I'm covered by the parody and fair use laws, but
okay.
Who knows?
Okay, yeah, I mean, by this point, you probably are, because it's been over a decade, so...
Right.
Do you plan on to keep going for as long as you can?
Yeah, I'll keep going until people stop talking to me.
Are you eventually going to go back to LA and do in-person interviews?
I think so, if I can, but to be honest, now that genie's sort of out of the bottle, it's really hard to, and I understand, it's really hard to convince people to do it in person. Because when I think about it, I'm like, oh, hey, come over to this place, come out of your way, and do the, it seems really like a big ask now, where, it's so much easier to just sit at home and do it. So I may attempt, but I don't know how successful that will be.
I'm sure you can pull it off. You did it once before. I'm sure you can do it again. And
yeah, certain people for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I love the feel of the energy in the room with two people, you know? Like, I like that one you did with Paul Provenza. Like, I can really
Oh yeah.
feel the energy between you two.
Yeah, and I like the atmosphere of stuff when we would do that. Yeah, we did that at his office, which was really fun. Yeah, there's stuff that like definitely is missing when I don't do it in person. Like my friend Casey was running Busy Phillips' late night talk show, and I went to a taping, and then Casey and I recorded our episode literally sitting on the set. After the show, and that was really cool. Or like Cliff Nesteroff, the first time I had him on, we sat at the counter at Uso Frank, and you kind of get into that atmosphere. So yeah, I mean, there's stuff like that. I think definitely is lacking, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, now that you're doing it on Zoom, is there a specific day that you record, or is it like any day?
Because my show's not timely, I tend to bank episodes, so not even by design, but I tend to end up going in like runs. So like in a week, I'll do like 10 of them, and then not do one for a couple weeks. Or so it's really whenever people can record, and it depends. You know, I'm on the East Coast, so it's a lot of people on the West Coast. You know, sometimes people are in Australia, so I have to do it, you know, 8 o'clock at night is like 10 a.m. their time. That is the other good thing about doing it remote is it's really expanded the people I can have. So it's not just people in New York or LA, or if they're coming through Boston, you know, I've had people from Ireland and England and Australia and Canada, so that's been cool.
Yeah, and they drop every Monday, right?
Yes, yeah, they do.
A couple quick things. Now, I did not know this until I read it on your Wikipedia, and I was cracking up. In 2018, you had a Twitter feud with Ann Coulter.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, I had some tweets go viral, which is always a nightmare. Yeah, she's just a terrible person.
Yes.
We dated Jimmy J.J. Walker for a while, which is weird.
Oh, I don't doubt it. He's a conservative.
Yeah, I've done shows with him. Yeah, that was very strange. That went by like crazy viral. It was like millions of people shared it.
Yeah, oh my God. Yeah, did she like DM you or anything?
No, oh God, no.
That's good. Yeah, Bill Maher. I watch his show Club Random every Sunday, and just recently he mentioned, I'm so fucking tired of people asking me about dating Ann Coulter. I never dated her. You know, we're acquaintances. You know, she's done my show several times, but we never dated.
Right.
Oh, and I love Meatballs 2 and Caddyshack 2. I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, superior films to the originals. I think people have Saturday Night Live colored goggles on for the originals, and the sequels I find more entertaining and rewatch more often.
Yeah, because I've heard you say it on the show, and I had to make sure I brought those up. Yeah, when I had Archie Hahn on, and
nice.
We talked a good 10 minutes about Meatballs Part 2 because that was his most screen time of any movie he had ever done. And
very memorable in Phantom of the Paradise, though.
Yes, that as well. Yeah, we talked about all his memorable movies, you know, and The Groundlings and everything. And he told me, you know, there was a anecdote on IMDb for years that him and Misty Rowe really did have an affair on set, right? And he wanted to sue IMDb, but as it turns out, a friend of his put that on there as a prank, so his friend had it removed.
That's very funny.
He was pretty upset, though. Yeah, and you know, I want to have Alan Arkish on the show, but I know he won't talk about Caddyshack 2.
Yeah, people had a bad time on that. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I know the story about they tried to get Rodney back, and they tried to get Sam Kinison to play the lawyer instead of Randy Quaid.
Well, they had Rodney back, and he dropped out when shooting started.
Right. But he also didn't want to do it if Sam didn't want to do it.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
I don't think he wanted to do it in the first place.
Yeah, because the first one was such, you know, a comedy masterpiece that was just incidental because, you know, they derived from the script and just made this, you know, movie that's all over the place.
Right.
So you got any upcoming comedy shows or guests you want to mention?
I'm doing some more shows with Todd Berry next month in upstate New York, and some shows in New England in October. Who do I have coming up on the show? I'm in the midst of my marathon right now, so this week it's Matt Chicola, who's in a great Boston band called Jack.
Mm-hmm.
next week is Matt Farley, who's another local guy who's written over 40,000 songs. Very interesting guy. And then Matt McCarthy is the third and final Matt of the Marathon. And then Will McRobb is on after that, the co-creator of Adventures of Pete and Pete. And Shelley Herman's episode is the last episode in August.
Oh, I'm so happy about that. Yeah, that is so awesome. Well, Ken, you are a national treasure of a podcast host, and keep creating. I will keep listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your summer, great rest of your day, and be safe out there, man.
You too. Thank you. So nice to talk to you.
Yes, absolutely. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Well, there you have it. Ken Reid. Ain't he a cool dude? Oh, what a nice, cool guy and very funny. I'm so glad we got to have this talk today. I finally had the TV guidance counselor on my show, and I'm so glad he's got Shelley on. I am so happy about that. Well, until next time, this is Tabby Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes.